I felt my father's hand tremble as he raised his glass in the bright light of the grand hall. The chandeliers glittered above me, cut crystals scattering light like daggers on the polished marble, each glint a reminder of my own shattered world. 1 year after Tate married Alina, my fiancée once, Conrad Merrick stood before me beaming, as if nothing had changed. He held his glass aloft, a rehearsed smile curving his lips. "Congratulations, son," he said warmly, raising a toast to Tate. My brother mirrored the gesture with a smug grin, his eyes never flicking in my direction. I stood to the side, an invisible spectator at the celebration of my destruction. When my father set his glass down, the clink echoed in my chest like a hammer blow. He turned to me, face impassive. "Rent's due, Kellen, $900 by Sunday. You're an adult now." His words, clipped and devoid of affection, struck deeper than any insult. I forced my jaw not to clench so tightly that my teeth might crack. "Why do I pay?" I asked, voice rough, "while he gets rewarded?" I pressed the question as if my life depended on it. "Because he's worth it," my father replied smoothly, as though discussing the weather. "Worth it?" Tate, the brother who slid into Alina's life and stole my future, was worth a luxury car. I, on the other hand, was worth a monthly rent check. I glanced at Alina, her polite smile a thin veil over her guilt. My ring finger twitched where her engagement ring once rested, a constant irritant. I tasted bile as applause rippled around me. Faces blurred, my mother's eyes watering, friends whispering, colleagues nodding sympathetically. I forced a smile that tasted like ash. The memory of that night when I discovered them in my apartment surged unbidden. Tate lurking behind the door with that triumphant grin, Alina's eyes flickering with shame. My heart had dropped, the world tilting off its axis. My car had slammed into the guardrail mere moments later, torn metal matching the scream in my soul. The antiseptic odor of the ER, bright lights overhead. I remembered Tate calling our parents, soothing them with lies as I lay bleeding. Today, the betrayal felt orchestrated by my father's indifference, his selective love paying Tate while discarding me. I swallowed the urge to yell, to punch a hole through the elegant wall panels, to strip the veneer and expose every lie. But I could not betray my father's vicious satisfaction. Instead, I turned away from the center of attention, letting guests step aside as I made my way toward the exit. Behind me, laughter and music throbbed like a migraine. My shoes squeaked on the marble as I passed rows of banquet tables, plates of half-eaten hors d'oeuvres, empty wine goblets gleaming under crystal light. My senses felt muted, as though I watched through thick glass. I tried not to flinch at the stares. Pity, curiosity, satisfaction. Each step away from the ballroom felt like shedding a layer of skin I no longer recognized as mine. When the grand doors opened, a cool night breeze wrapped around me, slicing through my suit like a revelation. The moon hung low over the manicured gardens, pale and silent. I paused, catching my breath as the noise inside receded. The distant murmur of voices became a faint hum, replaced by the rustle of leaves in the breeze. The lawn stretched out before me, dew-kissed grass glinting under moonlight. I could almost hear Tate's laughter drifting on the wind, Alina leaning into him as my father nodded in proud approval. They would not think of me again tonight. A surge of anger and clarity flooded my veins. I recalled the nights I had spent scrimping for therapy sessions, paying out of pocket despite dwindling savings. I thought of the internships I had crushed myself with, the side jobs to prove I was more than a trust fund. We had built something together, Alina and I, but my father's approval always lurked behind every success. Now, that approval had evaporated, leaving a cavity of betrayal too deep to fill. I pulled out my phone, reading the barrage of missed calls from my mother. "Please come home." Tate's frantic messages. "Bro, can we talk?" Even Alina's number glowed insistently, though I refused to look. I swiped the screen until it powered off, forging a barrier between me and the wreckage of a life I once called mine. My mind drifted to Eden's Cross, a coastal town where our grandfather had once lived. A place so far removed from Merrick Manor that my name meant nothing there. I had made silent plans, packed a duffel bag with a few clothes, set aside a stack of savings envelopes. I had contacts in that town who knew of my work fixing antiques, and I had enough to rent a small room above a cafe. No one there would expect the Merrick name to mean entitlement. I could build something from the ground up, unlabeled by my father's manipulation or Tate's ambition. I took a step forward onto the gravel path, each crunch beneath my feet feeling like liberation. The moonlight guided me toward a slender road leading away from the estate. I felt fear tug at my chest. Fear of the unknown, of failure, of loneliness. But that fear paled next to the weight of betrayal, humiliation, and wasted devotion. I exhaled, letting the breath carry away every doubt I'd held for months. In my pocket, I felt the envelope thick with the remainder of my savings, enough for a fresh start. I straightened my shoulders, inviting the breeze to cool my hot skin. The night air was crisp and clean, freeing. I passed the marble pillars that gleamed white in the moonlight, reminders of the life I left behind, opulence built on lies, privilege balanced on the backs of the betrayed. I thought of the therapy journals I had abandoned, pages filled with my fears and hopes, thoughts that now felt like an alien language. I had once thought I needed validation from a father who saw me as a liability, from a brother who saw my love as an open door. That illusion shattered tonight. I refused another day of pretending I belonged to a family that used me as collateral. I climbed the slight incline of the driveway, the mansion's silhouette dark against the sky. I could hear the soft strains of music inside, the final strains of their celebration. I let them be. I didn't want their apologies or their explanations. Tonight, I wanted nothing but to become the person I was intended to be, free from the strings they had tied. I paused at the crest of the hill, looking back at the grand hall, bathed in golden light, laughter spilling from its windows. I felt a spark of emotion, sorrow that I had lost my place, relief that I no longer needed to prove my worth. I lifted my chin and made a silent vow. I would forge a life from my own choices, not my father's ledger, not Tate's ambition. I would find people who saw me for the man I was, not the pawn they used. The path stretched out before me, illuminated by the gentle glow of moonlight and fireflies dancing in the dew. I heard no footsteps behind me, no voices calling my name. I was on my own terms now. I exhaled slowly, shoulders relaxing as I stepped away from Merrick Manor's iron gates, stepping into uncertainty and possibility. The breeze carried the faintest hint of salt from the nearby ocean, promising rebirth and resilience. My heart pounded with equal measures of terror and exhilaration. What came next was unwritten, a blank page I would fill with choices I made for myself. I would be unchained from the expectations and betrayals that had defined me. Tonight marked the end of my old life, a life measured by rent notices and fleeting affections. My shoes touched the cool pavement leading away from the estate. I felt my father's empire recede with every step. My brother's success, my ex-fiancé's hollow smiles, my parents' suffocating expectations. All of it remained behind me, trapped in the gilded halls of Merrick Manor. Here, under a sky heavy with stars and possibility, I embraced the unknown. I inhaled one final time, the crisp night air filling my lungs and forging something fierce inside me. I felt a sense of peace I had not known in months. I was choosing myself. The world was wide and waiting. I would claim a future beyond my father's reach, beyond Tate's shadow, beyond the pain they inflicted. I was no longer their son or their heir. I was mine. That's when I knew I was done. I moved through the house like a ghost, silent and deliberate. The living room furniture sat in familiar places, but I saw it all with new eyes, as though someone had rearranged not the couch and coffee table, but the relationships and expectations that had shaped my life. I opened drawers and pulled clothes from hangers, folding each garment neatly. A reminder that I still cared about some semblance of order, even as the world around me had collapsed. My duffel bag lay open on the bed, empty except for the faint echo of the air I had already begun to leave behind. I slipped my favorite hoodie into its depths, along with the jeans I'd worn when Tate and Alina sucker-punched my heart a year ago. I packed the canvas sneakers that had carried me through late-night shifts and the worn-out t-shirts I used for therapy sessions I could no longer afford. I stuffed away unhelpful memories only in the garments themselves. The sweatshirt Tate had given me for graduation, the shirt Alina wore the night she told me she was in love with my brother instead of me. Each piece of clothing carried a story, but none of those stories mattered anymore. In the kitchen, I gathered the few dishes I owned. One chipped coffee mug that read, "World's Okayest Brother," a mismatched bowl from my early days at college, and a fork dented by too many meals eaten alone. I slid them into a plastic bin, stacking them carefully so they would survive the journey to Eden's Cross. I paused when I saw the magnet holding up my mother's latest grocery list on the fridge door. Beside it, A post-it note in her familiar slanted handwriting reminded her to call the plumber and to pick up my favorite ice cream if she saw it on sale. Underneath, taped to the steel door, was a photograph of Alina and me on our engagement night, my arm around her slender waist, our eyes brimming with hope. I peeled it off, folded it gently, and placed it in a small envelope labeled Memories, Discard. I refused to carry that image with me. When all my worldly possessions were packed, no more than a duffel bag, a savings envelope thick with the last of my funds, and a few sentimental items tucked discreetly, I turned to the empty fridge door. The house felt impossibly silent, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for me to finish this final act. I uncapped a fresh Sharpie and ran the tip across the surface, my hand steady despite the knot inside my chest. My breath caught with each letter I wrote, the ink bleeding through the thin, magnetic paper. The words spilled out in one continuous line. This house owes me nothing, but I owe myself everything. Don't look for me unless you plan to apologize with actions. I pressed the note firmly against the cold metal, using another magnet to keep it from slipping. I held my hand there a moment longer, fingertips tracing the final period, as though I could etch this declaration into reality rather than simply scrawl it on a scrap of paper. For so long, I had deserved an apology from my family. An acknowledgement of the betrayal that had cost me my fiancé, my savings, my sense of self. Now, I was making a vow to myself. I would not return until I saw concrete change. I owed myself that much. I stood back and surveyed my handiwork. The message glowed ominously in the dim kitchen light, a silent challenge to anyone who would come looking. There would be no half measures, no empty words, only actions. I brushed my hand over my stubbled chin, feeling the rough prickle as if it were a reminder that I had grown beyond being their child. I inhaled deeply, committing to memory the smell of the air here, faint hints of last night's dinner, the lingering scent of pine cleaner my mother favored, and the sterile edge of white tile flooring. Everything I had known was here in this house, but tomorrow I would breathe a different air. I loaded the last items into my car in the early pre-dawn haze, careful to avoid the neighbors' windows. The street was quiet. No passing cars, no dog barking, only the faint hum of a streetlight. Every thump of my heart filled the stillness with urgency. I slipped behind the wheel, the steering wheel cool against my palms. I looked at the rearview mirror, catching a glimpse of the exterior porch lights still glowing faintly. I closed my eyes for a second, committing the sight to memory. The front door, the potted plant beside it, and the nameplate that read Merrick. I knew I would not return to that name as it had been. My pulse slowed when I realized that I no longer belonged there, that I had outgrown that name. I drove away without glancing back. The acceleration felt like an exhalation, as though every bottled-up frustration, heartbreak, and sense of betrayal spilled out through the tires into the asphalt. The streetlights shifted in my peripheral vision, creating streaks of light that blurred behind me. My mind was too busy mapping a new future. Eden's Cross lay hundreds of miles south, a place where my grandfather once lived and where I would not be recognized as Kellen Merrick, the son who had failed. Instead, I would arrive as someone who could build a life from scratch, who could cobble together a new identity from the fragments of a broken past. I tried to sleep in the back seat, reclining the seat slightly and wrapping myself in the hoodie I had packed. The rhythmic sway of the car was almost comforting, like a lullaby for a heart that needed healing. But when I felt myself drifting into sleep, I startled awake at the image of my mother's voice screaming into the phone, the panic in Tate's messages, and the cold indifference in my father's voice. I shoved the memories away each time they crept in, remembering that I had no intention of going back. In the morning, my phone buzzed with 38 missed calls. Alina's name appeared at the top of the list, her number blinking like a neon sign. Below hers were Tate's frantic messages. Bro, please, come back. We can talk. My mother's name floated further down, her voicemails a barrage of tears and pleading. But I kept driving, the odometer ticking forward, each mile taking me further from their world. I had one last glance at the small envelope sitting on the console, my savings, labeled clearly for rent, food, and a life outside the Merrick Empire. I pulled off at a rest stop just before noon, stepping out into the fresh air. I unlocked the door to reach for a bottle of water, and my phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my mother. Where are you? Please call me. I pressed the ignore button. Let them call. They would see when I did not answer. I walked to the edge of the rest area. eyes on the horizon where the sky met the distant line of pine trees. I allowed myself a moment of regret. I would never see that kitchen again, never taste my mother's Sunday pancakes, never hear Tate's laughter echo in the hallway of Merrick Manor. But that regret was tempered by relief. A relief born from leaving behind a house that owed me nothing and stepping into a life where I owed myself everything. By the time the sun began its descent, I crossed the state line into coastal country, salt tanging the air, sea breeze teasing my hair. Eden's Cross lay ahead, a town so small that no one would know my name. I turned off the highway onto a narrow road flanked by dunes, where the only sound was the persistent cry of gulls. My car's tires crunched on the gravel driveway leading to the Whitaker Cafe, the rickety, weathered establishment where I had arranged for a room. I parked and stared at the peeling paint of the sign, Whitaker Cafe and Guest Room. The steady beam of the afternoon sun illuminated the porch, revealing an old rocking chair that my grandfather once used to sit on while watching the tides come in. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of sea salt mixed with coffee brewing inside. Before I exited my car, I dug into my pocket and pulled out the small envelope of savings. I counted silently, enough for the first month's rent, groceries, and a down payment on tools to fix antiques. I fastened the envelope beneath the passenger seat where my phone lay face down, screen off. I did not want the world to distract me from this moment. With one last look at the cafe, I climbed out, each step resolute and free from the weight of my family's expectations. I stepped onto the rough wooden porch, the boards creaking under my weight. The cafe bell tinkled as I opened the door, releasing a wave of warmth and the aroma of fresh coffee, cinnamon, and the faint musk of aged wood. Behind the counter stood Nora Whitaker, her gray-streaked hair tied back in a loose bun, as that had seen too many storms yet still held quiet kindness. She looked up from polishing a mug, and when she saw me standing there, tall and tense, she gave me a gentle nod. "You must be Kellen," she said, voice soft but steady. No surprise, no pity, just acceptance. I offered a small, tentative smile. "Yes, I'm here to move into the guest room." She wiped her hands on her apron and handed me the key on a simple wooden keyring. "Room is ready. No questions asked." I accepted the key, letting relief wash over me. I felt the mantle of being Kellen Merrick slide off my shoulders. Here, I was just a man looking for a place to start. As I climbed the narrow staircase to the loft above the cafe, I thought about the note I had left on the fridge back home. They would not come looking for me, not unless they were prepared to apologize with actions. And I doubted they ever would. Yet here, in the quiet hum of Eden's Cross, I felt hope stir in my chest for the first time in a year. I unlocked the door to my new room and stepped inside. The walls were painted a faded seafoam green, and the single window overlooked a field of wildflowers that swayed in time with the breeze. A wooden dresser stood in the corner, its surface dotted with a few framed photos, pictures of Nora's late husband and the cafe in bygone days. A small desk held a stack of local newspapers and a lamp shaped like a lighthouse. I set my duffel bag on the bed and let the tension in my shoulders dissolve. I reached into my pocket for the savings envelope and placed it on the nightstand, a symbol of both my past and my new beginning. That night, as I lay in the narrow bed listening to the sea's distant roar, I replayed the events of the last 24 hours. The note on the fridge, the missed calls, the anger and disappointment I had left behind. For so long, I believed my family would come searching for me, that they would beg for forgiveness. But they had offered nothing but silence and screeching tires. Now, with the envelope tucked away and tomorrow's sunrise just hours away, I allowed myself to drift into sleep. Tomorrow, I would visit the local antique shop, my new source of income. I would introduce myself as just Kellen, not the disinherited son of Conrad Merrick. I would show up with tools and an earnest willingness to work. The thought of spending my days restoring old furniture, working with my hands instead of finance spreadsheets, filled me with quiet optimism. For the first time in a long while, I felt excited about what lay ahead instead of dreading the inevitable disappointment. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, allowing the salty air seeping through the cracked window to calm the storm inside. I owed myself everything, and tonight, I began repaying that debt. Eden's Cross was not just a place on the map. It was my refuge, my second chance. As I sank into the thin mattress, I whispered a silent promise to myself. No apologies, no turning back, only actions from this moment forward. With that vow echoing in my mind, I let sleep claim me, ready to face a future built on my own terms. Tate was always the golden child, the one who could charm a room and bend it to his will with a single grin. Even as a kid, he knew how to tilt his head just so to win over every teacher, every coach, every neighbor who mattered. I'd always been the one trailing behind, the second son with dirt under his nails and eyes too serious for family photos. But after he stole my fiancée, Alina, and then paraded her around town like a prize, I thought they'd won. I thought that was the end of the story. Turns out, it was just the beginning. It started with a photograph on social media, Alina's account, to be exact. A gala in some luxury hotel, all white linen tablecloths and sparkling wine glasses. She wore a silver dress that clung to her like it was sewn from starlight, her arm looped through Tate's like it belonged there. He had that same smug grin, the one I'd seen 1,000 times before, the one that said, "I always win." But what caught my eye wasn't the dress, or even the way Tate leaned into her. It was the watch on her wrist, my design. The one I'd sketched out for her birthday the year before she left me for my brother. The prototype I'd poured months of overtime and every last favor at the local jeweler into, just to surprise her. And on Tate's wrist? The matching version he demanded after seeing hers, the one I'd ordered under pressure from Dad, who insisted it would keep the brothers bonded. I'd given it to him even though I knew, even then, that every time I looked at it I'd remember the look in Alina's eyes the day she said she didn't love me anymore. Seeing those watches again, hers and his, like twin trophies on display, felt like someone had ripped open an old wound and poured salt in it. I might have let it slide, but the internet didn't. A few commenters recognized the design, noted the resemblance to my earlier work, and started asking questions. Didn't Kellen design those? One asked. Another wondered if Tate had bought them both. The irony bit so deep it tasted like blood. I'd left town to escape this exact mess, but Tate and Alina had carried it with them, like a pair of peacocks strutting through my old life. By the end of the week, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked it later, a woman's voice shook on the recording. "Kellen, it's Olivia. Maid of honor. I'm sorry, but Alina's not okay. She's unraveling. Did you really walk out with nothing?" Because she's starting to ask questions she can't answer. Her voice cracked on that last line, as if the weight of the truth was too heavy to hold. I sat on the edge of my new bed at Nora's place, staring at the sea through the cracked window, the sound of gulls and salt air mixing with the beat of my heart. I thought about how many times I'd played the scene over in my head. Alina choosing Tate, Dad rewarding him, me left with the bill and a suitcase full of disappointment. But hearing that she was unraveling? That was different. That was proof that their perfect world had a fault line running right through the middle. I didn't call back. I didn't text. I let the silence answer for me, because silence had always been my punishment in this family. Silence was what Dad gave me every time Tate did something that required me to step aside, to pay the price, to carry the blame. Now, that silence was my weapon, and I wielded it with more precision than I'd ever wielded any words. I went down to the cafe that night, the smell of coffee and cinnamon rolling over me like a comfort I hadn't known in months. Nora was closing up, wiping down tables and humming to herself. She glanced up when I came in, her eyes sharp and knowing. "Rough day?" she asked, like she could see every broken piece of me. I gave her a half smile. "You could say that." Some ghost came knocking. She nodded, like she'd heard that line before. "Well, you're safe here. Nobody's got your number but the ones you give it to." She placed a cup of coffee in front of me, steaming and black, no sugar. Just the way I liked it. "Drink up. You look like you're fighting a war in your head." I took a sip, letting the bitterness ground me. "Feels like it," I muttered. The hum of the place, old ceiling fans creaking, the click of the cash register, the muted sound of a song from decades ago felt like a barrier against the chaos outside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe, like I didn't owe anyone an explanation or an apology. My family was too busy trying to keep their perfect world from falling apart to come looking for me, and that was exactly how I wanted it. A couple of locals came in for a late snack, their laughter easy and unforced. I watched them the way you watch a movie, distant, detached, almost envious. I wondered if they had brothers who stole their lives, if they had fathers who made them pay rent for the privilege of existing. Probably not. I let that thought slip away, finishing my coffee with a final, bracing sip. When I got back upstairs, I checked my phone. More missed calls, more voicemails, all from numbers I'd learned to ignore. Tate's last message was a drawn-out sigh of desperation. "Bro, we need to talk. Things are not good over here. His voice trembled, like he was the one who'd been betrayed, like I owed him comfort. I almost laughed, but the laugh died in my throat, replaced by a steely resolve. Let him feel the ground shake. Let him learn what it meant to lose control. I powered down the phone and set it on the nightstand, its blank screen a small act of rebellion. I didn't owe them a reply, just like they'd never given me the decency of honesty. I stretched out on the bed, the springs creaking under my weight, and let the sound of the ocean seep into my bones. For the first time in months, I felt a calmness that didn't feel like defeat. I drifted off thinking about the watches, about Alina's shaking hands and Tate's panicked voicemails, about how easy it had been for them to build a life on the ruins of mine, and how quickly it was falling apart without me there to prop it up. I thought about Olivia, her voice trembling as she told me Alina was unraveling. Good. Let them both unravel. Let them feel the sharp edges of the choices they'd made. I'd spent a year bleeding for them. It was their turn to explain things now. As I closed my eyes, I pictured them, Tate staring at his reflection, wondering how his perfect image had cracked. Alina, twisting the ring on her finger, asking herself how she'd ended up with a man who'd stolen everything he had. And Dad, cold and calculating, watching his empire tremble because the son he'd dismissed had finally refused to be silent. I let the ocean's rhythm lull me to sleep, the scent of salt and wood and old memories blending into something that felt like home. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost in someone else's story. I was the author now, and they were the ones playing catch-up. I owed them nothing but the truth, and that was already more than they'd ever given me. Tomorrow, I thought, I'd wake up and keep living. I'd keep building the life they said I didn't deserve. And when they came looking for me, and they would, eventually, I'd be ready. Let them come with their apologies, their excuses, their pleas. I'd hold up the mirror and make them see every lie, every theft, every time they chose him over me. Let them unravel. Let them see what it felt like. Let them learn that sometimes silence is the loudest answer of all. When I first pulled into Eden's Cross, the sign was so weathered I almost missed it. A battered wooden plank leaning at an angle, paint faded to the color of old bones, letters barely legible in the salt air. But I knew the place by heart. My grandfather's stories had drawn it for me 1,000 times. The smell of the sea drifting through the open windows, the old lighthouse standing guard at the edge of town, the people who wore their scars like medals instead of secrets. I had come here because I knew no one would remember me as the son of Conrad Merrick or the brother who lost everything. Here, I was just Kellen, a man looking to build something from the wreckage. I parked outside the Whitaker Cafe, the engine still ticking as it cooled. The air smelled like damp wood and ocean spray, and I let it fill my lungs as I stared at the small building. The sign overhead, Whitaker Cafe and Guest Room, looked freshly painted, a bright contrast to the rest of the town's weathered edges. The windows glowed with a warm, amber light that seemed to spill onto the street, a small beacon calling me home. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and locked the car with a satisfying click, as if sealing away the last pieces of my old life. Inside, the cafe was almost empty except for a couple of locals nursing their coffee. The place smelled of cinnamon and brewing espresso, and something sweet, maybe caramel or vanilla. A record player crackled in the background, filling the space with a low, steady hum. Behind the counter stood Nora, her gray-streaked hair pulled back into a loose bun, her eyes sharp and kind at the same time. She wore an apron dusted with flour, and her hands were steady as she wiped the counter. When she saw me, she paused, studying my face as if she'd known I was coming long before I had. "You look like someone who's trying to build a life from rubble," she said, not unkindly, just honest, her voice worn by years of speaking truths no one wanted to hear. I felt my shoulders drop, tension easing from places I hadn't realized it had burrowed into. "Something like that," I replied, my voice hoarse from the long drive and the longer silence I'd carried for months. She nodded, as if that was all the explanation she needed, and reached beneath the counter. A small key, worn smooth by time, dangled from her fingers. She slid it toward me. "Room upstairs. Sheets are clean, and the view's not bad if you like the ocean. Rent's due every Friday, but we can figure that out if it's too tight." She didn't ask for a deposit, didn't mention references. She didn't ask about my father or my brother. She just gave me a place to start. "Thank you," I said, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. I picked up the key and held it tight, feeling its weight in my palm. a solid thing in a world that had felt like smoke and shadows for far too long. I climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, each step creaking under my weight, as though the building itself was testing me. The hallway smelled of old wood and lemon oil, and I found my door at the very end. The key fit the lock with a satisfying click. The room was small, a twin bed in one corner, a wooden dresser against the far wall, a window with a view of the ocean that framed the horizon in a way that made it feel infinite. I dropped my bag on the bed and crossed to the window, pushing it open so the sea breeze rushed in, cool and sharp, filling the space with the scent of salt and possibility. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. No one here cared that my father thought I wasn't worth a car, or that my brother thought my fiancée was his for the taking. No one here cared that I'd left behind a note on a fridge and a mess of family secrets. Here, I was just a man who'd come to fix antiques, maybe fix himself along the way. I leaned against the window frame, watching the waves roll in, the tide smoothing out the rough edges of the sand like a promise. Downstairs, Nora's laughter drifted up through the floorboards, mingling with the clink of coffee cups and the hum of conversation. The sound was warm, real, nothing like the hushed, polite tones that had filled the halls of Merrick Manor. I realized, with a kind of soft shock, that I didn't miss that place. Not even a little. Here, in this small town at the edge of the world, I had a chance to be something new. Someone who didn't carry the weight of his family's expectations or his brother's betrayals. Someone who could be defined by what he chose to build, not what had been stolen from him. I unpacked my few things, folding shirts into the dresser drawers, lining up the tools I'd brought with me: pliers, chisels, sandpaper, small containers of varnish and glue. My hands itched to get to work, to take something broken and make it whole again. That's what I wanted for myself, too. To rebuild. To restore. To be something more than the sum of all the ways I'd been broken. As the sun began to set, I made my way back down to the cafe. Nora was wiping down tables, the last of the customers trickling out into the cool evening air. She looked up as I approached, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Settling all right?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness of my voice. "Feels like a good place to start over." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Good. We can always use another pair of hands around here. And you seem like the kind of man who's got a lot of work to do, inside and out." I laughed, a sound that felt rusty in my chest but genuine. "You have no idea," I said, and she laughed too. "Maybe I do," she said, her smile softening. "But you're here now. That's a start." It was enough. More than enough. That night, I lay in bed listening to the ocean whispering to the shore, the sound of the tide a steady rhythm against the silence that had ruled my life for too long. I thought about my father, his cold smile as he handed Tate the keys to a new car. I thought about Tate, the way he'd smiled at me that night like he'd won some game he'd been playing all his life. I thought about Alina, the way she'd looked at me like I was an obstacle instead of the man she'd once promised forever. I thought about all of them, and I let them go. I let the ocean take them, washing them away like footprints in the sand. Here, in Eden's Cross, I wasn't a Merrick or a disappointment or a footnote in someone else's story. I was Kellen. Just Kellen. And that was enough for me. As sleep claimed me, I promised myself that tomorrow I'd find the antique shop my grandfather used to talk about, the one where old things wouldn't be made new again. Maybe, just maybe, I'd find a way to make myself new, too. The tide rolled in, the moon climbed higher, and I slept like a man who knew that sometimes you have to walk away to find where you truly belong. The attic was hotter than I expected, a low-ceilinged furnace beneath the old cafe's roof. A single dusty bulb swung overhead, throwing shadows that danced like memories across the wooden beams. I hadn't planned on coming up here, but Nora had asked me to help sort through the boxes stacked in the corners, remnants of a life half forgotten, left to gather dust while the world moved on below. I knelt beside a stack of trunks, their brass latches tarnished by time, and something inside me tensed with anticipation. The scent of old wood, salt air, and the faint tang of musty paper filled my lungs. Each trunk felt like a time capsule, a chance to piece together the fragments of a story I hadn't known I was part of. I opened the first trunk with a creak that made me wince. Inside, layers of newspaper wrapped around delicate china cups, their handles chipped and paint faded but still whole. I unwrapped each piece carefully, like I was handling a part of my own history. These were the relics of a man I'd only known through family stories. My grandfather, the one who'd build a life here before my father turned everything he'd touched to glass and cold ambition. I found a photograph at the bottom of the trunk, my grandfather standing beside a younger Conrad Merrick, both of them wearing the same half-smile, like they'd agreed on a secret. I set the photo aside, heart tight. Dad had always acted like Eden's Cross was a footnote, a place he'd left behind in pursuit of something bigger. But here, in this attic, I saw that he'd once belonged here too. And maybe that was why he'd tried so hard to erase it from me. The second trunk was heavier, the hinges stiff with rust. I pried it open with a screwdriver, sweat dripping down my back. Inside, stacks of folders leaned against each other like drunks at a bar. Most were old receipts, invoices for cafe repairs, letters from neighbors. I flipped through them, page after page, until one manila envelope caught my eye. Its edges were frayed, the string tie barely holding it shut. Across the front, in my grandfather's unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "Second Will, Eden's Cross Property." My breath caught. My hands shook as I lifted it out, the weight of it 1,000 times heavier than paper should ever be. I moved to a small work table by the window, sunlight filtering through grime-streaked glass. I untied the string and pulled the document free. My grandfather's signature stared back at me, steady and deliberate, as though he'd known this day would come. The will was dated a year before he died, well after the one my father had paraded around in court when he took over everything, when he made sure the Eden's Cross property became just another asset on his spreadsheet. But this will named me the heir. Not Conrad. Not Tate. Me. I read it 3 times to be sure, each word carving itself into my bones. I leaned back in the chair, the weight of the discovery pressing down on me like a truth I hadn't known I was waiting for. My grandfather had seen the same man in Conrad that I'd come to know, the man who wore fatherhood like a badge of convenience, who'd chosen Tate's smile over my steady loyalty every time. He'd seen the greed in Conrad's eyes, the way he'd let Tate plunder my life without so much as a word of apology. And he'd made sure that Eden's Cross would come to me, the one who actually valued it, the one who had come back when the rest of them had turned their backs. A laugh bubbled up in my throat, raw, bitter, but strangely freeing. Dad had probably destroyed the copy he kept at home, confident no one would find the other. He'd always been good at covering his tracks, at making sure the world saw only what he wanted it to see. But he'd underestimated the attic, the dust, the stubbornness of a grandson who wasn't willing to stay broken forever. I thought of Tate, his business booming with money that should have been mine, the same business I'd quietly subsidized without even knowing it. I thought of Alina, her diamond ring sparkling on stolen money and stolen promises. And Dad standing there with that cold smirk, telling me I was an adult now, rent due by Sunday. I could see them all so clearly, their lives propped up on the back of my sacrifices, their laughter paid for with my sweat and tears. But not anymore. I stuffed the will back into the envelope and tucked it into the inside pocket of my jacket. My hands still trembled, the adrenaline coursing through me like a second heartbeat. I had to protect this, had to make sure it got into the right hands. I needed someone who could stand up to Conrad Merrick and make this stick. I needed a lawyer who wasn't afraid of the Merrick name. That's when Jasper Holloway's card came back to me, a man my grandfather had mentioned in one of his letters, a local attorney with a reputation for being as stubborn as the tides. I'd seen his number scrawled on a post-it in Nora's kitchen, back when I'd first arrived. I remembered the neat, no-nonsense lettering in the sense that Jasper was the kind of man who wouldn't back down from a fight. I pulled out my phone and found his number, my thumb hesitating for a split second before pressing dial. The phone rang twice, then a steady, no-frills voice answered. Jasper Holloway. I cleared my throat, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Mr. Holloway, my name is Kellen Merrick. I think I just found something you're going to want to see. I didn't give him time to dismiss me. It's my grandfather's second will, the one that names me the heir to the Eden's Cross property. The silence on the other end was brief but charged, the kind of silence that spoke of gears turning and pieces falling into place. You sure about that? He asked, his voice low but urgent. Yeah, I said. I'm sure. I've got it right here in my hands. I gripped the envelope tighter, feeling the paper crinkle beneath my fingers. All right, he said after a beat. I'll meet you at the cafe in an hour. Bring the will, and don't let it out of your sight. We'll make this official. His voice carried a confidence that steadied me, A promise that I wasn't in this alone anymore. Thanks, I breathed. I'll be here. I ended the call and tucked the phone back into my pocket. My heart was still hammering, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was purpose. It was the first real taste of justice I'd felt since that night at Merrick Manor when my father raised his glass and toasted Tate's betrayal. I thought about that moment, about the cold emptiness in my father's eyes, and I felt the anger and betrayal inside me harden into something stronger. Resolve. I stood, brushing dust from my jeans, and glanced around the attic one last time. Boxes leaned in their corners, shadows gathering in the eaves. The ghosts of the past didn't feel so heavy now. I had the will. I had the truth. And I had the means to take back what was mine. As I headed down the narrow staircase, the air felt cooler, sharper, like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. I stepped into the cafe, the scent of coffee and warm bread wrapping around me like armor. Nora looked up from the register, her eyes curious but kind. "You all right?" she asked. I nodded, a small smile on my lips. "Better than I've been in a long time," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Well, good. You look like a man who's about to change his life." I took a breath, the second will heavy in my pocket, and met her gaze. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." And with that, I walked out into the fading afternoon light, ready to reclaim the piece of my life that my family had tried to bury. I closed the cafe door behind me and climbed the narrow staircase to my small room, my mind a storm of thoughts. The second will burned in my pocket like a brand, but I knew that paper alone wouldn't be enough to set things right. Jasper Holloway had promised to file it, to challenge my father's control, but I still felt like there was another piece of the puzzle waiting to be unearthed. My gut told me that if Dad had buried one secret, he'd buried others. That's why, after dinner, I found myself standing in the darkened hallway by Nora's storage closet, staring at the old safe she'd mentioned. A relic from the days when her husband had run the cafe. She'd given me the key earlier, her eyes wary but trusting. "You look like a man who needs answers," she'd said. The key turned in the lock with a heavy click, and the safe door creaked open like a confession. Inside, yellowed envelopes were stacked in neat bundles, each marked with dates and labels. At first, they looked like ordinary business records, utility bills, vendor invoices, tax returns. I flipped through them with numb fingers until one file caught my eye. It was labeled transfers, and my name was scrawled across the top in a handwriting I recognized all too well, my father's. My chest tightened as I pulled it free and opened it. Bank statements, wire transfers, documents with my signature, except I'd never signed them. My breath caught as I saw the amounts, thousands, tens of thousands, funneled from my account to Tate's business month after month. It was all there, black and white proof that my father hadn't just stolen my fiancée, he'd stolen my future. My hands trembled as I flipped page after page, each one a fresh betrayal. I felt a laugh, bitter and sharp, slip from my lips. They hadn't just stolen love. They'd stolen money, my identity, my trust. They'd left me with nothing, all while telling the world I was the failure. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up months ago, leaving only resolve. I took a deep breath and gathered every document, shoving them into my bag. My mind was already forming a plan. I'd send copies to the people who mattered. Jasper, the journalist who'd covered Dad's latest charity gala. Even Alina, if I felt like twisting the knife. Let them see the truth. Let them know who they'd been praising all these years. That night, back in my room, I spread the documents across the bed. The moonlight caught the edges like silver blades. I started scanning them, one by one, sending them to my lawyer, and then to an anonymous reporter in our hometown. My finger hovered over Alina's contact. I typed a message. "Ever wonder who really paid for that diamond on your finger?" Tick, tick, boom. I hit send and leaned back, feeling a calm I hadn't known in months. It wasn't revenge. It was justice, and it was long overdue. It was barely dawn when my phone started buzzing. I opened one eye, the screen casting a cold glow in the dim room. Alina's name blinked at me first, 17 missed calls by the time I scrolled through. Her voicemails played like a horror movie soundtrack in my head, frantic apologies, whispered pleas for me to talk to her. I let the messages roll off me like rain on glass. Tate's name followed, 3 voicemails, each one beginning with bro, like that word still meant something. The last one was ragged, his voice cracking. "Bro, let's just talk. Please. I didn't know everything. Can we fix this?" I could practically see his perfect hair disheveled for the first time in years. Then came Mom. Her voice trembled on the recording. Kellen, please. Your father's reputation is falling apart. The phone hasn't stopped ringing. Please, you don't have to do this. She cried like it was my fault, like I was the villain for telling the truth. I stared at the ceiling, the lines of the cracked paint like a roadmap of every broken promise they'd handed me. But I wasn't the one doing anything. The truth was, the documents I'd sent, copies of forged signatures, bank transfers, the second will, were finally seeing daylight. Jasper had promised me that. We'll put this in the local paper, he'd said. Everyone will know what Conrad did. He delivered. By noon, the expose ran on the front page. Local businessman accused of embezzling son's accounts. My father's empire cracked like glass in a hurricane. I got a call from my old boss, who once told me I wasn't a good fit. He sounded nervous. Kellen, we didn't know your father blacklisted you. You were always qualified. We're sorry. There's an opening here if you want it. I hung up without answering. That wasn't my world anymore. Let them scramble. Outside, the town buzzed with rumors. People pointed and whispered. For years, I'd been the failure. Now they saw who'd really failed. Dad's kingdom was crumbling, and I didn't have to lift a finger. I'd always been unqualified, they'd said. But the truth? I'd been blocked. By the man who was supposed to build me up, not bury me. And now, finally, everything was unblocked. The weight on my chest was gone, replaced by something lighter, freedom. I stepped out into the morning sun and felt the warmth on my face. I wasn't the broken one anymore. The world was. And I was ready to watch it rebuild on my terms. The driveway to the estate felt longer than I remembered, its winding curve lined with manicured hedges that seemed to loom taller, shadows stretching across the path like silent accusations. Each step I took up that drive felt like a reckoning. My shoes crunched on the gravel, the sound sharp and final in the heavy afternoon air. I thought of all the times I'd walked this path before. Head down, shoulders tight, rehearsing apologies for crimes I hadn't committed. Not today. Today, I wasn't the one who owed explanations. Dad was waiting for me at the top of the steps, standing in front of the heavy oak doors like a king holding court. His jaw was tight, his lips pressed into that thin line I'd come to recognize as both warning and challenge. His eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, studied me as though he still believed he could reduce me to the trembling boy I used to be. But I wasn't that boy anymore. I was the man holding the truth. He didn't invite me in. He didn't offer a drink or a seat. He just stood there, hands folded, his silence a weapon. I met his gaze and refused to look away. This is your legacy, Kellen? He asked finally, voice low and hard. Dragging our name through the mud? I let out a short, humorless laugh. No, Dad. This is your undoing. I just stopped protecting you. I reached into my bag and pulled out the thick file. Copies of the second will, the forged bank transfers, the statement showing every cent he'd siphoned from my accounts. I held them out to him like an indictment. His hand hovered for a second, then closed around the file. His fingers trembled as he flipped through the pages, the color draining from his face with each revelation. I watched him carefully, every reaction cataloged and filed away. I'd spent a lifetime memorizing his tells. The slight twitch at the corner of his mouth when he lied, the way his eyes darted when he was cornered. Today, he had nowhere to run. You think this will hold up? He asked, his voice strained, but that arrogance still clung to him like a second skin. You think you can just waltz in here with a stack of papers? And I cut him off. If you try to spin this, I'll release everything. To the press, to the police, to every investor who ever put a dime into Tate's business. I leaned in, my voice steady, unshakable. You have until Monday to settle. Sign over Eden's cross. Pay back every cent you stole from me. And make a public apology. Or I burn every bridge you've built. The words felt like steel on my tongue, hard, deliberate. He taught me that. He taught me that words could be weapons. His jaw flexed, the file trembling in his grip. You think you've won? He spat. I didn't flinch. I didn't win anything. I just took back what was mine. The truth settled between us like a blade. I saw his shoulders slump, the fight bleeding out of him. He'd built his empire on lies and stolen trust. Now it was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. He looked at me then, not as a son or a rival, but as an equal. And maybe that was the worst punishment of all for him. He couldn't control me anymore. He couldn't twist my life to fit his plans. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. And it felt like justice. Go, he said finally, his voice ragged, like the wind had been knocked out of him. Take what you want. Just leave me with something. His shoulders sagged as though the weight of every lie had finally crushed him. I didn't pity him. I didn't hate him. I just saw him for what he was. A man who'd spent his life taking until there was nothing left but dust. I turned and walked down the steps, the file still in his hands, my own future no longer tangled in his shadows. The sun had dipped lower now, the sky painted in bruised purples and oranges, as if the world itself recognized the end of an era. As I reached the bottom of the drive, I paused and looked back. The estate loomed behind me, its windows catching the dying light. I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected, freedom. For years, that house had been my prison, a place where I'd measured every word and every breath to keep the peace. But now? Now it was just a building, a relic of a family that had eaten itself alive. I took one last breath of that air, sharp, with a hint of old roses and cut grass, and turned my back on it. The path ahead of me was uncertain, but it was mine, and I would walk it without apologies. I'd come for the truth, and I'd found it. The rest was up to him. As I reached the road, my phone buzzed. Jasper's name lit the screen. I answered, my voice clear. "It's done," I said. His tone was calm, but firm. "Good. We'll finalize everything Monday. You did the right thing, Kellen." I looked at the estate one last time, the dying sun casting long shadows across the lawn. "Yeah," I murmured. "For once, I really did." And with that, I turned toward Eden's Cross, the sea breeze on my face, and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. It was time to build a new one where the only debts owed were the ones I chose, one where I wasn't a footnote to someone else's story, one where I was free. Monday came with a gray sky that seemed to weigh heavily on everything beneath it, a fitting backdrop for the reckoning I'd set in motion. I arrived at Jasper Holloway's office early, the manila folder in my hand like a key to a door I'd waited my whole life to open. Jasper's assistant led me to his office, a cozy room lined with old books and worn leather chairs. The smell of coffee and aged paper calmed me, a reminder that some places still felt human. Jasper sat behind his desk, glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he scanned the documents I'd given him. He looked up, his eyes sharp and satisfied. "They're ready to settle," he said. "Your father's legal team contacted me first thing this morning. They want this quiet. No drawn-out court battles, no headlines that tarnish the Merrick name. You'll get everything your grandfather left you, plus full restitution for the money they siphoned from your accounts. And your father has agreed to a public apology." He paused, studying my face. "It's everything we asked for, Kellen. It's more than fair." I let the words sink in, the enormity of them. For years, my father had treated my life like an inconvenience, a place to dump his mistakes. Now he was being forced to acknowledge what he'd done. Not in whispers, not behind closed doors, but in front of the world. I felt a tremor of something like triumph, though it didn't feel as sweet as I'd once imagined. It felt necessary, like setting a broken bone straight. Tate, too, had taken his share of the blow. Jasper had shown me the documents. His startup investors had fled the moment the embezzlement story broke. The business that had once made him the golden child was now a castle of sand dissolving in the tide. I wondered if he'd ever understand the price of building your success on someone else's sacrifice. Alina had called me twice that morning, her messages a jumble of apologies and explanations. But I deleted them without listening. She'd made her choice the day she left me for my brother. Some bridges don't just burn, they collapse. I signed the papers with a steady hand, the pen gliding over the pages like a final signature on an old wound. Jasper notarized everything, his seal pressing into the paper with a quiet finality. "You did it, Kellen," he said, his voice low but proud. "You took your life back." I nodded, my chest tight with the weight of it. "Yeah," I murmured. "I did." We left his office together, stepping into the damp morning air. The clouds threatened rain, but I felt lighter than I had in months. Jasper clapped me on the shoulder. "I'll handle the filings," he said. "You go live your life." He smiled, the kind that made me feel like I'd done more than win a legal battle. I'd won something bigger, my freedom. I drove straight to the estate, the deed to Eden's Cross in my pocket, the apology letter from my father waiting in the glove compartment. The driveway seemed shorter this time, less imposing. The house loomed, but it no longer felt like it could swallow me whole. My mother met me at the front steps, her eyes red, her hair pulled back like she'd aged 10 years since the last time I'd seen her. She reached for my hand, her voice trembling. "Kellen, I'm so sorry. I should have seen what he was doing. I should have." Her words trailed off, tears brimming. I squeezed her hand, feeling an ache of something like forgiveness. "It's done now, Mom," I said gently. "He's not my responsibility anymore." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks, and I felt a pang of sadness for the woman who'd stood by him for so long. But I couldn't carry her guilt, too. I had my own life to rebuild. Inside, I found Dad in his study, the place where he'd orchestrated every betrayal. He looked smaller now, shoulders hunched, eyes tired. He held the apology letter in one hand, the other drumming nervously on the desk. He looked up when I entered, his mouth opening like he wanted to say something. I raised a hand, cutting him off. "You have until tomorrow to make the apology public," I said, my voice calm. "Don't think for a second I'll hesitate to release everything if you don't. You signed the settlement. I expect you to honor it." His eyes darted away, shame or fear, I couldn't tell. "All right," he whispered. "All right." I turned and walked out, each step freeing me a little more. I didn't need to hear his excuses. He'd already said enough. I drove back to Eden's Cross with the deed in my hand, the apology letter a folded piece of paper that no longer defined me. Nora was waiting in the cafe, a cup of tea steaming on the counter. She looked up and smiled, her eyes warm and knowing. "Well," she said, "looks like you stopped disappearing." I let out a slow breath, the weight finally lifting. "Yeah," I said, smiling back. "I think I did." I took a sip of the tea, letting the warmth fill the cracks that betrayal had left behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be, and the world, for once, felt like it belonged to me. The night sky over Eden's Cross stretched wide and deep, a canvas of stars and salt air, reminding me of the bonfires my grandfather used to build on the beach, gatherings of neighbors, the glow of laughter and music weaving through the dark. I'd always thought those nights were just a piece of his charm, a relic of simpler times. But now, standing on the sand with the cool wind at my back, I saw it differently. Those bonfires were about community, about giving people a place to feel seen and safe when the world felt cold. That's what I wanted to build. Not for my father, not for Tate, for me, and for every kid who'd been told they didn't matter. The Firelight Foundation started as an idea scrawled on a napkin in Nora's cafe, a name that felt like a promise. I poured every cent of my restitution into it. A program for young adults who'd been pushed aside by family, by the system, by life itself. A place where they could learn skills, woodworking, painting, antique restoration, anything that gave them a chance to reclaim their worth. Nora joined the board without hesitation, her eyes shining with the same stubborn kindness that had offered me a room when no one else would. Jasper handled the legal side, weaving my grandfather's will into the very bones of the foundation so no one could take it away. I gave the first talk myself, standing in front of a handful of skeptical faces in a repurposed warehouse that still smelled of salt and sawdust. I told them my story, not as the victim of a powerful father, but as a man who'd found his way out of the shadows. I spoke about being a son, a fiancé, a scapegoat, about learning that sometimes the people you think you need most are the ones who will hurt you the deepest, and how that pain doesn't have to define you. By the time I finished, the room was silent, the weight of every shared story pressing down on us like a heartbeat. Afterward, one of the guys, just 20, thin as a reed, with bruises on his arms he didn't bother to hide, came up to me. "You really got out?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, and he looked down, his eyes shining. "Then maybe I can too." That's when I knew. This was where I was meant to be. Not in the halls of Merrick Manor, not in Tate's shadow, but here, helping build a fire that no one could snuff out. The first months were hard, funding was tight, and every setback felt personal. But each time I saw one of those kids walk through the door, head held a little higher, eyes a little clearer, I knew we were on the right path. Nora kept the coffee brewing, Jasper kept the wolves at bay, and I kept showing up. That's what mattered most, showing up, not just for them, but for myself. In the end, I didn't need my father's approval or Tate's envy or Alina's apologies. I needed my own courage to step into the light. The Firelight Foundation became more than a program. It became my family, a place where every scar was a story, and every story was a reason to keep fighting. And in their eyes, I finally saw myself, not as the disappointment they'd always whispered about, but as the one who got away and thrived. It was her birthday, the kind of night people would post about for weeks, the rooftop lounge glowing with string lights, champagne tower glistening under the city skyline, guests dressed to impress. Ariel, my wife, floated through the room like she owned it. And, in a way, she did. She picked the venue, the color scheme, the playlist, even the brand of imported roses lining the balcony. I watched her from the edge of the crowd, holding a drink I hadn't touched, smiling at people I barely knew, trying to remember when this stopped being about celebration and started feeling like spectacle. I'm Miles Forrester, 40, general contractor. I build things for a living, structures, spaces, foundations that don't crack when life leans too hard. And for 9 years, I thought I was building something just as solid with Ariel. We had our differences. She grew up around summer homes and European vacations. I grew up around construction dust and discount store sneakers, but I never thought I was less. Until she took the mic. Her heels clicked as she stepped onto the little raised platform they'd set up near the DJ booth. She looked radiant, I won't lie. Red dress hugging her body, eyes glittering with champagne and attention. I expected her to thank everyone for coming, maybe tell a cute story or two, like she usually did when the spotlight found her. Instead, she cleared her throat and glanced in my direction with that sly smile she wore when she thought she was being cute. I just want to say, she began. I scanning the sea of faces, I feel incredibly blessed. Not just because it's my birthday, or because of all you beautiful people being here tonight, but because, well, she paused for dramatic effect. I mean, let's be real. I'm married down. The crowd laughed. Loud. A ripple of amusement washed across the room. I stood there, trying to understand if I'd heard her correctly. She laughed too, shoulders shaking, like it was the best line she'd ever delivered. I waited for her to pull it back, to say, just kidding, to add something soft to clean up the edge, but she didn't. She leaned into it. Sometimes, when you're feeling insecure, you pick a guy who makes you feel like you're the star. Like, you always shine brightest. The laughter doubled. Her friends nearly spilled their drinks. Her father slapped the table like he was at a comedy club. Even Tyson, my best friend and the only person from my side of life who showed up, gave me a look, equal parts apology and disbelief. I smiled. Of course I did. I smiled like a good husband, like a man who knew how to play along. I nodded, pretending I wasn't bleeding out beneath a tailored shirt and quiet restraint. Inside, though, I went still. Not angry. Not defensive. Just still. That was the moment. That exact moment where something inside me, something I hadn't even realized was under pressure, snapped into clarity. She wasn't joking. Not really. You don't say something like that unless it's already settled deep inside you as truth. This wasn't a playful jab. This was a reveal. An accidental admission. And once you see that, once the curtain lifts and you realize the person you've been loving doesn't see you as equal, you can't unsee it. She finished her speech with a toast, lifted her glass high, and turned to blow me a kiss. The crowd followed her lead. They clapped, cheered, took videos. Someone shouted, "You're a queen, Ariel." And in that moment, she was regal, commanding, cruel. I felt like a caricature. The supportive husband. The steady guy in the background who doesn't mind being overshadowed. And maybe for a while, I didn't. Maybe I liked being the one who made sure the house didn't leak and the bills were paid and the dog got walked. But somewhere along the way, she stopped seeing that as strength and started treating it like furniture, necessary, unnoticed. I moved through the rest of the party like a ghost. People talked to me, clapped me on the shoulder, laughed like we were all in on the same joke. But I wasn't. I was the joke. And not the kind that makes you laugh. The kind you regret when the silence hits. Later, when the music got louder and the drinks stronger, I slipped out onto the edge of the balcony. The city buzzed below, cars, lights, lives in motion. I stood there gripping the rail, wondering if I'd imagined the weight of what she said. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. It wasn't the words. It was the ease. The comfort with which she said them, the way she basked in the reaction. That ease doesn't come from fiction. It comes from familiarity. She didn't look for me the rest of the night. And I didn't go back to her side. I just stood there, still and silent, while inside, the party roared on. When we got home, she acted like nothing happened. She kicked off her heels by the door, hummed some offbeat pop tune while peeling off her earrings, and started talking about how amazing the party was. "I think it was my best birthday yet," she said, grinning as she opened the fridge, grabbing that overpriced lemon-infused water she always insisted on having chilled. I followed her movements, not saying a word. My coat was still on, my keys still in my hand. But she didn't notice, or maybe she did and decided to pretend she didn't. Finally, she turned, sipping from her glass. You okay? You've been quiet. I looked at her for a long beat. Then I asked, voice flat, what did you mean by that joke? She blinked, like I'd interrupted some internal monologue she'd been enjoying. What joke? You know what joke. She rolled her eyes, walking past me like the question didn't deserve her time. Oh, that. Babe, relax. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. You're being sensitive. There it was, that word again. Sensitive. Ariel's favorite label whenever she didn't want to take responsibility. She said it with the same tone she used when I brought up how she always corrected me at dinner parties, or when she made those sly digs about my dirty boots when I came home from work. It was her way of invalidating me. Not directly, but with just enough condescension to make it sting. I didn't laugh, I said. She froze, hands still on the back of the couch. Slowly, she turned. You're seriously upset about that? Miles, come on. You know I love you. It was a dumb line. People say dumb things when they've had too much champagne and too much attention. You're reading way too much into it. Maybe I was. But maybe I wasn't. Because something about the way she said it, light, dismissive, practiced, made me realize she'd done this before. This wasn't the first time she'd stepped on me to lift herself up. It was just the first time I really heard it. I didn't answer. I didn't argue. I just walked past her into the hall, down to the workshop I'd built with my own hands. A space she never really stepped foot in. Said the smell of sawdust and metal polish gave her a headache. But for me, that room was more than wood and tools. It was sanctuary. It was where I felt like myself. I stood in the center of the space, the glow of the overhead bulb humming above me, and looked at everything I'd built. Contracts spread across the table, blueprints rolled up in the corner, a calendar marked with upcoming projects. She'd never once asked me what I was working on. Never asked how the jobs were going or how the teams were doing. To her, it was all Miles and his maintenance stuff. She didn't know I was negotiating a 7-figure contract with a downtown developer. Didn't know I'd recently bought a second truck and expanded into a third office location. She'd never cared enough to ask. Because to Ariel, I was her safety net. The guy who showed up, who stayed quiet, who held her coat while she basked in the limelight. I looked at my hands. Calloused, rough, strong. The same hands that had fixed every pipe in our house, assembled every piece of furniture she impulsively bought online, paid every bill, even the ones she didn't know we had. Hands that had been steady through every emotional storm, through every dismissive remark. And now those hands were done holding it all up. I started packing. I didn't move with rage. I wasn't shoving things into bags or throwing clothes across the room. No. I packed with the same precision I used to lay foundation beams and draft framing plans. I took my time. My tools, my documents, my personal files, all of it went into the truck quietly. Efficiently. She was upstairs for most of it, curling her hair, getting ready for some late-night hangout with her friends. Girls' night, she called it earlier, winking. The irony wasn't lost on me. At 9:12, she came downstairs in a backless dress, heels in hand, purse slung over her shoulder. She paused just long enough to blow me a kiss over her shoulder. Love you, babe, she said. I didn't respond. She didn't notice. By 9:30, the truck was loaded. The contracts she'd never cared about were in the passenger seat. The workshop lights were off. The door was locked behind me. I didn't touch the bedroom. Left all my clothes hanging, shoes lined up. Let her wonder why I hadn't cleared them out. Let her think I might come back. I didn't leave a note, but I did schedule an email. 6:45 a.m. sharp. I typed it slowly, deliberately. No insults. No begging. Just truth. Quiet and clear. And then, I drove off. Not in anger, not in heartbreak, but in stillness. Because when someone tells you who they are, even through a joke, you listen. And I'd finally heard her. She left at 9:12 p.m. in heels and a backless dress, head held high like nothing had cracked. Like she hadn't stood in front of her entire social circle and turned her husband into the punchline of her power trip. She didn't look back, just called, "Love you, babe," and blew a kiss like we were still playing house. I didn't catch it, didn't raise a hand, didn't flinch. I just watched her go, watched the door close behind her with that soft click that, for the first time in 9 years, didn't carry the weight of routine. It sounded like release. By 9:30, the house had fallen completely silent, and I was already halfway through what I needed to do. I moved with focus, not fury. No slamming drawers or angry music blaring from the Bluetooth speaker. Just the steady shuffle of boots on hardwood, the quiet creak of hinges, the zip of bags closing. Every tool I owned, I packed with care, my drills, levels, measuring tapes, chisels, all the things she joked made me look like a maintenance guy. Those tools had built homes, saved contracts, fed us. But to her, they were props in a life she thought she'd grown too big for. I lined them in the back of my truck with the same reverence I used on job sites. No scratches, no mess. These tools were an extension of me. She didn't respect them. She never respected what they symbolized, what they made possible. Then came the documents. Contracts I'd signed over the years. Project reports. Business registration forms. The leases on the properties I'd invested in quietly under the name M. Forrester Holdings. She didn't know I even had a holding company. Never asked. Never wanted to know. All those years of me thinking I was protecting her from financial worry, making life easier, and maybe I was. But I was also giving her a world she thought came effortlessly. She'd once asked me why I never posted about work. You should share what you do, she'd said. But she didn't mean it. She meant, post something that makes me look good. She didn't want sweat. She wanted shine. That wasn't me. I grabbed my spare phone next, the business line. She didn't even know it existed. I kept it separate from the start, just in case. I'd used it for supplier orders, contract bids, team management. It buzzed with quiet power. Ariel was never curious about it. Too many phones, she said once. Makes you look shady. Ironic. The last thing I took was the key fob to the new truck. The one she thought I was borrowing from the job site. It was mine, titled, insured, and paid for in full. I hadn't told her about it. Some part of me already knew, months ago, that there would come a time when I'd need to go, and go fast. I didn't touch the bedroom. Left the closet full. The shoes. The belts. Even the watch she bought me 2 birthdays ago that never quite fit right. I left it all. I didn't want her to walk into an empty room and know I'd planned this. I wanted her to be confused. To wonder. To replay that speech in her head over and over, trying to figure out if that was the moment everything started to unravel. There was no note. No dramatic monologue. No movie-ending speech about how she broke my heart. I wasn't heartbroken. Not anymore. I was awake. Before I stepped out the door, I scheduled an email on my laptop. Drafted it in the workshop, just a few lines. I wasn't interested in justifying myself. I wasn't going to beg for understanding. I was going to leave her with the only thing she never gave me. Clarity. The email would hit her inbox at 6:45 a.m., right after she stumbled back into the house and realized I wasn't waiting up. Right after she noticed the keys missing from the hook. The boots gone. The garage door untouched. Right after the silence hit her. I walked out of that house the same way I walked out of the church when my father passed. Still, but with finality. Not rushing. Not confused. Just knowing. The driveway lights blinked on as I opened the truck door. I took one last look at the house. Our house. And realized I didn't feel sadness. I felt air. Like my lungs had space again. Like I'd been living bent over without realizing it, and finally straightened my back. The truck engine hummed beneath me as I pulled away. No destination pinned on the GPS. I didn't need one. I had a place ready, a rental under my business name. 1 bedroom. Workshop in the back. Nothing fancy. Just mine. I drove with the windows down. The city thinned out behind me. The noise, the lights, the laughter from her party still ringing in my memory, but it didn't sting anymore. It just sounded like what it was, noise. Manufactured joy for a life that never really included me, just featured me when it was convenient. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was done pretending she respected me. And that, for the first time in a long while, felt like peace. By the time she stumbled back through the front door, it was just past 6:30 a.m. The sky outside still carried the early hue of morning, the kind of gray-blue light that doesn't quite know if it wants to be dawn or dusk. She was probably half drunk, heels in one hand, phone in the other, expecting to crawl into bed and demand breakfast by noon. But she didn't find me waiting. No boots by the door. No coffee brewing. No hum of the workshop tools she always said were so loud for no reason. No miles. And it hit her fast. I know that because her first call came at 7:02 a.m., a buzzing vibration on the business line I kept in my glove compartment. I didn't even look at it. Just stared ahead, parked in front of the lake house I'd secured a few months ago. At the time, I told myself I needed a quiet place to work, a getaway. Now I realize, deep down, I was already preparing for an escape. The second call came a minute later. Then a third. A fourth. Then came the text. Where are you? At 7:06 a.m., my scheduled email hit her inbox. Subject line, "You married down, remember?" The body of the message wasn't long. It didn't need to be. "You stood in a room full of people and laughed at the man who built your world with his hands. I hope it was worth it." Below that, 3 attachments. The first was the PDF file of the divorce papers. Everything filled out, no drama, no mess. Just signatures needed. I'd had them drafted by a lawyer she didn't know I kept on retainer for business affairs. Turns out business and personal sometimes overlap. The second was a detailed accounting of the silent partnership I just dissolved. For 9 years, I'd funneled part of my business earnings into the joint account she had access to, never questioned where the money came from. Trips, clothes, spa days. She'd always assumed I was just good with budgets. She didn't know I'd been the silent half-owner in a residential development company that paid quarterly dividends. A company she'd benefited from without ever asking how. Now, that tie was cut. Fully. Legally. And the third attachment? A scan of the deed to the house. Under my name. Only mine. The house she lived in. The one she decorated and called ours in Instagram captions. I had bought it before the wedding. Paid it off by our 4th anniversary. But I never added her name. Not out of suspicion, but because she said once, over wine, "I don't need to own anything. I just like pretty things." That should have been a clue. They say the truth is loudest in silence. And that morning, as she stared into an empty house with a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing and a heart that probably hadn't skipped in years, I imagined she heard it loud and clear. Later, Carmen, our next-door neighbor, called me. I didn't ask how she got the number. I already knew. Carmen had always been the quiet observer, the woman who said little but saw everything. Her voice was half laughing, half horrified. "Miles, what did you do?" "I think you broke her," she screamed. I asked, loud, like someone died. I thought she found a rat or something, but nope, just your email. "Good," I said, then hung up. It wasn't petty. It wasn't revenge. It was precision. Surgical. Clean. Honest. I let her sit in the same quiet I'd lived with for years. Let her walk through that cold house and realize that her world, the one she built on curated dinners and designer rugs and click-worthy parties, was missing its foundation. Because that's what I was. The foundation. And foundations don't need spotlights. They don't ask for attention. But when they leave, everything above them cracks. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat out on the deck of the rental house, listening to the water lap against the dock. No texts. No explanations. No drama. Just me. The man who had been married down, but walked away standing taller than ever. By noon, Tyson called. I let it ring twice before I answered. "She's losing it," he said. "Figured. She's trying to figure out where you went. Asking everybody. Her dad's pissed. Her friends think you're having a midlife crisis." She's trying to figure out where you went. Asking everybody. Her dad's pissed. Her friends think you're having a midlife crisis. I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. "Tell them I'm having a clarity crisis instead." Tyson paused. "You good, though?" I looked around. Bare walls, wood floors, soft breeze drifting in from the lake. "I'm better than good." "All right, man," he said. "Just wanted to check. Let me know if you need anything." Thanks. For not saying anything to her. She didn't deserve an explanation. He was right. She didn't. Because some people don't want to understand you. They want to own your silence. Mold it into their version of the truth. But when that silence turns into distance, and that distance becomes absence, that's when they finally realize silence was never weakness. It was restraint. And mine had just run out. She used to say it all the time, sometimes with a giggle, sometimes with a mock sigh, sometimes after too much wine when the honesty slipped out between slurred syllables. "You're lucky I chose you." And I'd smile, not because I believed it, but because I thought it was harmless. I thought love could hold through little ego trips and careless jokes. I thought it was just how she expressed herself. But looking back, it wasn't harmless. It was layered and intentional. Over the years, she reminded me I was lucky more times than I can count. Lucky she gave me the time of day. Lucky she tolerated my flannel shirts and muddy boots at her gallery events. Lucky she didn't try to change me, even though she constantly tried to soften my rough edges in every subtle, calculated way possible. She dressed it all up in charm and social grace. But the message was clear. I wasn't quite enough. I was a fixer-upper she learned to live with. I was a story she told when she wanted to appear grounded. "He works with his hands," she'd say with a smile to her friends, as if she were describing a golden retriever who knew how to fetch. Never once did she say, "He owns 3 firms." Never once did she mention the late nights I spent drawing up blueprints, negotiating contracts, or managing payroll. She'd met me in a tool belt and decided that's where my story ended. But what she never knew, what she never cared to ask, was that I co-owned 3 contracting companies across the state. Not one, not a side hustle. 3. One for luxury residential builds, one for commercial interiors, and one, my quiet favorite, for revitalizing old warehouses into creative loft spaces. I'd help design and oversee half the high-rises downtown. My crews wore uniforms with my logo embroidered on the chest. My name was on contracts signed in rooms she'd never even stepped foot in, and I never told her. Not because I was hiding, but because I didn't feel the need to flaunt it. She saw restraint as inferiority. I saw it as security. I didn't need applause to know my worth. But that was the mistake, wasn't it? Giving someone the benefit of the doubt while they built a narrative around you. Letting someone clip your wings and call it a favor. She laughed at my silence, never realizing silence was where I kept all my strength. She thought not bragging made me small. What it actually made me was dangerous. Because the moment I decided I was done, there was no screaming match. No messy exit. Just a clean, precise disengagement that pulled every cord she didn't even realize was keeping her comfortable. She thought I needed her. She thought I couldn't breathe without her attention, her world, her social calendar. But what she really gave me all those years was a front-row seat to how power warps love. How people don't always marry you for who you are, but for what you can stabilize in them. She married me to feel taller, to feel superior. She needed someone steady to stand on so she could rise. And I played that role for years, not because I lacked self-respect, but because I thought love was service. I thought providing peace, structure, and loyalty would be enough. It wasn't. Because to her, love wasn't partnership, it was optics. The handyman husband. The rugged contrast to her curated lifestyle. The guy who stood quietly at parties while she floated through conversations, dropping jokes that made everyone laugh and me feel small. The one who'd take her keys when she drank too much, walk the dog when she was late to brunch, fix the sink when she overloaded the garbage disposal for the 4th time. But I was never her equal. Just a well-trained feature in the life she built for display. She didn't know about the scholarships I funded for trade school graduates, or the employees I mentored who now own their own crews. She didn't care that I got up at 4:45 a.m. every morning because leadership starts before the rest of the world opens its eyes. She never once asked about the men who counted on me to keep the lights on in their homes and paychecks in their pockets. I wasn't flashy. I wasn't fancy. So I didn't count. But now she's learning what silence costs. What presence actually meant. Because I wasn't just holding the bills or the wrench or the dog leash. I was holding her entire illusion. And when I left, the whole house, her version of it, anyway, started creaking. I got a message from one of her friends yesterday. Morgan, the redhead who always wore sequins like it was New Year's Eve. It just said, "You really walked away like a ghost. You okay?" I didn't answer. Not because I'm angry, but because some people don't get access to the new chapter. They only knew the character I played for her benefit. Now she's choking on the silence she mocked for years. Drowning in the absence she once called boring. And I'm not watching from the shadows. I'm not checking her socials or listening for updates through mutual friends. I'm just living. Quietly. Fully. Powerfully. Because the joke was never on me. It was on the woman who never realized what she had until the silence spoke louder than the wedding vow she forgot she made. I expected anger. Denial. Maybe a little shame. What I didn't expect was how fast Ariel would try to spin the story. She didn't apologize. Didn't reach out to take ownership of her words. Instead, she went on the offensive, weaponizing charm, leveraging sympathy, painting herself as the one left in the cold. It was almost impressive how quickly she turned her humiliation into a narrative of betrayal. Like she had rehearsed it. Like she'd been ready all along. By that afternoon, the texts started pouring in. "You just walked out without a word? That's cruel." One of her friends messaged Erica, I think, the one who always referred to me as Mr. Fix-It, like it was cute. Another came 5 minutes later. "You embarrassed her." That one had no name, just a number saved from one of those wine and cheese nights I was dragged to every month like clockwork. Then her mother called. "You've always been emotionally distant, Miles." She said it with that same clipped, icy tone she used the first time I shook her hand, years ago, when I wore a button-down she thought was too cheap for their brunch table. Back then, I thought time might soften her. But time just gave her more fuel to see me the way she wanted to see me, as less. I didn't answer any of them. Not the calls, not the messages, not the half-hearted guilt trips disguised as concern. They weren't reaching out for truth. They were reaching out for a version of events they could make sense of. One where Ariel was the victim. Where I'd simply vanished out of spite, abandoning the perfect life she built with such love. But I wasn't playing that game. I never had been. That was her arena, public perception, curated drama, emotional manipulation cloaked in casual phrases like, "You know how I am." Well, now she did. Now she knew what I was. Finished. She called Tyson next. I didn't have to ask. He texted me before I could even check. She's spiraling. Never seen her like this. I stared at those words for a while. Not because I felt pity. Not because I wanted to fix it. But because, for the first time, someone else saw her the way I had for years. Unfiltered. Unguarded. Cracking. I typed back slowly. She finally saw me leave. That's what she never thought I'd do. He didn't reply after that. He didn't need to. Ariel's entire world was built on one unspoken assumption, that I would always be there. Steady. Silent. Unmovable. She'd grown so used to my patience that she mistook it for passivity. She thought being calm meant I couldn't leave. That because I didn't fight, I didn't feel. She built her castle on that illusion, and now it was collapsing in real time, stone by stone. I imagined her sitting in the kitchen, surrounded by the expensive things she used to distract from meaning. The Italian espresso machine she never learned to use. The sleek, white marble island she once joked I'd never afford without her taste. The wine fridge with 6 different brands of rose that none of her friends ever finished. She'd look around and realize none of it could call her beautiful. None of it could hold her after a bad day. None of it could stay. I knew the next phase was coming. After guilt didn't work, after shame lost its effect, she'd try to rewrite the story publicly. She needed people to believe she was still in control, that she didn't lose her husband. He abandoned her. It would be strategic, smooth, a few curated posts, a healing caption, maybe a tearful brunch story with friends about how he just snapped. But I also knew the truth had already leaked. I hadn't expected it to, but Carmen told me. Apparently someone filmed her birthday speech. Not the whole party, just the part where she smirked and declared she married down. It had made its way onto a private Instagram story first. Then someone saved it. Then someone shared it. It wasn't viral, not yet, but in our circle, it didn't need to be. The video spoke for itself. I didn't need to defend myself. She'd done it for me. Publicly. Smiling. Champagne in hand. And the people she'd tried to win over with curated pity? They were watching. Some of them, I could already tell, were walking away, not from me, but from her. Even her old coworker texted me. Lynette. I barely remembered her, but the message was simple. I believe you. Just that. It didn't change anything. It didn't soften what happened. But it was validation from someone who had nothing to gain from saying it. Ariel built her reputation on being untouchable. Witty. Charismatic. Always in control. But the problem with always being in control is that the moment you lose grip, everyone sees the cracks. They don't pity you. They remember the times you laughed a little too loudly, cut a little too deep, stood a little too high above everyone else. And when the silence comes for someone like that, it's deafening. I didn't reply to Lynette. I didn't post anything. I didn't need to. I just sat by the lake, watching the still water stretch out into the horizon, thinking about how silence used to feel like a prison. Now it felt like power. And Ariel? She was finally hearing it. She tried guilt. She tried control. And when neither worked, she turned to rage. The texts changed tone first, no longer pleading or wounded, but sharp, accusatory, the kind of messages you send when your world's coming apart and you're desperate to make someone else responsible. I gave you a better life, one of them read. Another, hours later. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? There it was, the part she never meant to say out loud, but couldn't help anymore. How this makes me look. Not how it feels. Not how you hurt me. Not why did you leave. No, her panic wasn't about love. It was about appearance. Ariel had always been about the image. To the world, she was composed. Elegant. Her husband? The rugged balance. The man in the background who never asked for more. It was a setup that worked, because I never interrupted her script. Until I did. Now she was spiraling, and I wasn't responding. That silence? It terrified her. Because silence, to Ariel, was space she couldn't control. It wasn't just the absence of words, it was the absence of the power she held over me. I got a message from her boss, Lynette, the next day. Just 3 words. I believe you. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't spoken to Lynette much, only at those obligatory work events where I stood at Ariel's side like an accessory. I thought she saw me the way they all did, as the silent plus one with calloused hands and a polite nod. But now I wondered how much she had seen and simply chosen to stay quiet about. Or maybe, like me, she'd just gotten good at recognizing performance. Turns out, Ariel used to mock me at work events too. I never heard her firsthand, but word spread fast once the birthday video leaked. According to a mutual acquaintance, she often referred to me as her handyman husband, usually with a glass of wine in one hand and a sarcastic twist in her smile. People like him, she'd say. Salt of the earth. Very loyal. Just don't ask him about modern art or fine dining. That was how she kept herself elevated, by shrinking me. She didn't realize the foundation she was standing on was me all along. The house, the lifestyle, the spa getaways and designer bags, those were built on my work. My sweat. My strategy. While she was curating aesthetics and hashtags, I was negotiating contracts, managing projects, building things that would outlast both of us. And I never threw it in her face. I didn't need to. She laughed at my restraint. Never knowing silence was my currency. And now, with that currency no longer flowing her way, she was broke in more ways than one. The messages kept coming. You blindsided me. You humiliated me. You ruined us. But I hadn't ruined anything. I just walked away from something already hollow. And the irony? She thought walking away made me cruel. But cruelty isn't leaving someone after years of being belittled. Cruelty is loving someone for everything they are and watching them chip away at you to feel taller. Cruelty is what she whispered to her friends when she thought I wasn't listening. The way she spoke about me to her family. He's good with his hands, she'd say, like I was some pet project. Like I was a phase she'd outgrown. Control had always been her currency. Now she was overdrawn. That weekend, I drove to one of my job sites just to clear my head. It was a new development, modern townhomes with clean lines and open spaces. My crew was on site, pouring concrete, setting frames. One of the younger guys, Marcus, spotted me and jogged over, wiping sweat from his forehead. Boss, he said, grinning. Didn't expect to see you here. Just checking in, I said. Didn't want to be stuck in my head all day. He nodded, then hesitated. Saw the video, man. That was cold. I raised an eyebrow. Which part? The party speech. The Mary down thing. He looked down, uncomfortable. You didn't deserve that. Thanks, I said simply. You handled it like a king, he added. If it were me. I don't think I'd have stayed that calm. That was the thing. I didn't need to react. I'd already decided. The calm wasn't passive. It was intentional. The storm had passed. Now I was rebuilding. I stayed on site the rest of the afternoon, helping where I could, getting my hands dirty. It reminded me of who I was beneath everything. Not the man she shaped for photos and social events, but the one who built real things, solid things, things that lasted. When I returned to the lake house that night, I ignored the blinking notifications. I made dinner, turned on the radio, and sat by the window with a plate of pasta and a glass of wine she'd have called cheap. It tasted perfect. I didn't think about her voice, or her anger, or her public unraveling. I thought about peace, and how good it felt to live a life that wasn't being narrated for someone else's spotlight. She had used control as a mirror, always checking her reflection through my silence. Now, with no one left to reflect her image, she was starting to see herself for who she really was. And maybe, for once, that truth would be louder than the story she tried to tell. She asked for a meeting, not through a heartfelt message, not with an apology, just a cold, clipped text. Let's talk. I deserve that much. She used to be careful with her words. She used to know how to dress things up to sound graceful, considerate. But now the desperation was showing, leaking through the cracks she couldn't seal fast enough. And for once, she wasn't trying to sound sweet, she was trying to regain control. I told her we could meet, but on my terms. Public. Neutral. Lunch hour. No drama. No chance for tears to become a performance. The cafe I chose sat on a quiet corner downtown, far from her usual orbit of rooftop lounges and curated brunch spots. This place had worn hardwood floors, uneven mugs, and the smell of real coffee instead of overpriced syrups and brand-name pastries. It was the kind of place I liked. Unpretentious. Honest. I arrived 15 minutes early, grabbed a table by the window, and sat with my back to the wall. It wasn't paranoia, it was instinct. I wasn't there to relive anything. I was there to end it properly, face to face. Not for her. For me. She arrived 10 minutes late, wrapped in an oversized coat, no makeup on, hair tied back in a messy bun. For a second, I almost didn't recognize her. The version of Ariel standing before me looked nothing like the woman who lit up stages and dinner parties. This version looked lost. Not fragile. Not broken. Just untethered. She slid into the seat across from me, I scanning the room like she was unsure if she could be seen here. That alone told me she hadn't changed. Even now, her concern wasn't how we got here, it was whether anyone else might witness it. "Hi," she said softly. I nodded. "You wanted to talk?" "I'm here." She hesitated. I watched her fingers curl around the edge of the table, then release, then curl again. She was used to steering conversations, but she didn't know how to navigate this silence. "I didn't mean it," she finally said. "That joke, it came out wrong. I was nervous. I was drinking. People expect me to be funny, and I thought it would land differently." I let the words sit in the air a moment before I responded. "No, you meant it. You just didn't expect me to hear it." Her face twitched, just enough to show she hadn't prepared for that answer. "Miles, you've always known how I talk. I joke around. That's what we do." "No, that's what you do," I corrected. "I sit through it. I've been sitting through it for 9 years." She stared at me then, not with rage or tears, but with a sort of hollow stillness. Like she was trying to calculate whether any of this could still be salvaged. "I didn't think you'd leave," she admitted. Her voice cracked then. "Barely. I thought you loved me." "I did," I said plainly. "That's why I stayed after all the other times." Her bottom lip quivered slightly. "And now I love myself more." That was it. That was the moment. She knew it then. Whatever part of me she thought still lived in that house, in that life, was gone. She reached for my hand, slow and hesitant, but I pulled mine back. She flinched like she'd been struck. "I made a mistake." "No," I said calmly. "You told the truth. You just thought the truth wouldn't cost you anything." The air between us grew thick. I could hear the clink of dishes behind the counter, the hiss of milk being steamed, the distant murmur of other customers. But between us? Just truth. Unfiltered, unforgiving truth. "You think I'm a monster," she whispered. I shook my head. "I think you're someone who got used to being admired. And when that wasn't enough, you started using people like mirrors. You needed someone to reflect your shine back at you. And I did. For years. But I'm done being your spotlight." Tears welled in her eyes then. But I didn't lean forward. I didn't offer a napkin. I didn't move to comfort her, because comfort is for people who own their damage. And she still hadn't. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, but it didn't carry the bite she hoped it would. It wasn't a threat. It was a final attempt at rewiring the power dynamic. One last bluff. "No, Ariel. I'll remember this." "That's different." She wiped under her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "I don't know how to fix it." "You're not supposed to," I replied. "You're supposed to live with it. Just like I lived with all the things you thought were harmless." We sat in silence after that. Not awkward. Not tense. Just finished. I stood up, nodded once, and walked toward the door. I didn't turn around. I didn't look back to see if she was crying or texting or staring after me. The weight had lifted. The script was over, and I was no longer playing a role in her show. Outside, the breeze hit my face, crisp and clean. I walked 3 blocks to my truck, started the engine, and felt something shift deep in my chest. Closure doesn't always come with forgiveness. Sometimes, it comes with clarity. And I had mine. She thought the world would rally around her. That when I left, the people would rush in to hold her up, comfort her, protect the woman scorned. For a while, maybe they did, at least the ones who didn't know the full story. But image has a shelf life, and hers had just hit expiration. Slowly, one by one, the pieces started crumbling. The apartment, once full of curated laughter and expensive silence, started echoing back at her. Too quiet. Too still. No boots at the door. No soft clatter of my tools in the workshop. No humming of the washing machine late at night after I remembered to do her laundry when she forgot. She must have thought the quiet would be calming. It wasn't. Then came the money, or the absence of it. Her first call to the bank must have been a shock. The joint account was closed. The deposits that padded her weekends gone. The automatic payments bouncing. She had never looked too closely before. She trusted that the balance would refill itself like magic. But the magician was gone now, and the act was over. Her lifestyle depended on an engine she never bothered to understand. She never realized how much of her day-to-day was financed by a man she once referred to as comfortable but not ambitious. What she called comfortable, I called stability. What she dismissed as ordinary, I called integrity. But none of that mattered anymore. Then came the friends. The ones who had laughed loudest at the party, her audience. When the video leaked online, it wasn't just a clip. It was a headline. Birthday girl destroys her own marriage in 10 seconds. That's what someone titled it when it hit social media. Someone with a dark sense of humor and a sharp sense of irony. It spread quickly. Not viral by internet standards, but viral enough. Viral in our town. Viral in our circle. Viral in the boutique fitness class she posted about twice a week. Viral in the wine tasting group she curated on Instagram. And the comments? They weren't kind. Some defended her at first. It's just a joke. Everyone teases their partner. But the deeper the thread ran, the clearer it became. People saw it for what it was. Not banter, not wit, but cruelty. Dressed up and broadcast in front of people who were finally brave enough to call it out. Her closest circle began to fade. Not with announcements or declarations. Just distance. Slower responses. Missed calls. Brunches that had to be rescheduled. Silence she couldn't control. Because it turns out, when you burn the person who was holding you steady, people start wondering if they're standing too close to the flame. The first time she tried to laugh it off online, it was a carefully filtered photo of her holding a glass of wine, captioned, "Sometimes laughter is misunderstood. Here's to knowing your truth." But there were no likes from her usual crowd. No flame emojis. No hearts. Just one comment from someone named Diane. Hard to misunderstand someone saying they married down while smiling. After that, she didn't post for a while. When she reached out to me again, it wasn't with anger or manipulation. It was desperation. "Can we talk?" No punctuation. Just a flat line of need. The kind of message you send when the walls finally stop holding and you have no one left to lean on. I didn't reply. Not because I was vengeful. Not because I wanted her to suffer. But because I knew that anything I gave her now, words, attention, comfort, would only serve to rebuild the pedestal she once kicked out from under me. And I wasn't in the business of being her support beam anymore. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth catching up. It always does, eventually. The story she told about me, that I was lucky to have her, that I was the one riding her coattails, that I was just a handyman, had unraveled. And not because I exposed her. I didn't have to. She exposed herself. Publicly. Loudly. Gleefully. And when the applause didn't last, when the echo faded, she looked around and realized the only person who'd ever actually stayed was the one she pushed out the door. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding. Quietly. Intentionally. I took on new projects. Hired 2 new team leads. Spent more time on the job site and even more time at the lake, where my thoughts came without judgment, and the mornings broke with peace, not performance. I wasn't gloating. I wasn't watching her fall apart. I just stopped carrying the weight of her illusion. Let her world collapse. Let the applause die. Let the mirrors crack. Because when someone laughs at you in a room full of people and calls it love, the last thing they deserve is a second performance. And I was done being part of the show. I didn't block her. Not because I wanted to leave the door open, but because silence is louder when it's a choice, not a defense. I didn't curse her out, post cryptic quotes, or send angry messages at 2 a.m. I didn't beg her to understand. I didn't try to explain the weight of 9 years of quiet sacrifice. I let the truth sit with her the way I had to sit with it for years, alone, steady, and undeniable. She tried reaching out a few more times. A missed call. A long message I never opened. A voicemail where her voice cracked halfway through saying my name, followed by that awful pause where she must have realized she didn't even know how to talk to me anymore. That she never really did. She only knew how to talk about me. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because I had nothing left to say. Every word I'd held back for years had already been said through my actions. Every insult she dressed up as humor had finally echoed back, not from my mouth, but from the absence I left behind. The silence wasn't meant to hurt her. It was meant to show her how much noise I'd been absorbing all along. Now, I live in a quiet cottage by the lake. No marble countertops. No decorative pillows bought for the aesthetic but never used. Just clean wood floors, honest air, and space that breathes with me. It's not empty, it's peaceful. There's no performance here. No stage joy. Just me, and the life I rebuilt. My business is thriving. Funny how that works. When the noise dies down, you start to see things clearly. I poured everything I had into my companies. More focus, more leadership, more energy. Projects finished faster. Clients noticed the change. I wasn't dragging around emotional dead weight anymore. And the freedom showed in the work. I build homes again. Real ones. Foundations that don't shift under pressure. I shake the hands of people who look me in the eye. I walk into rooms and don't feel like I have to shrink myself to make someone else feel taller. I don't have to downplay what I've built to protect someone else's ego. Sometimes I get messages from people who saw the video. I don't know how many times it's been reposted, but apparently it struck a chord. I never reply. I don't need applause for walking away. But the messages come anyway. You handled that with grace. You're an example of strength. That silence. Masterclass. But it wasn't grace. It was clarity. Because there's something about being laughed at by the person who's supposed to love you that strips away every illusion. When someone tells you, out loud, on your birthday, with a mic in their hand and your friends watching, that they married you to feel superior, something inside you stopped settling. That moment didn't just change my marriage. It changed me. It reminded me that being steady is a gift, but letting people mistake it for weakness is a choice. And I'd chosen wrong for too long. There are still moments when memories creep in. Not the big ones. The wedding, the trips, the parties. Those are all noise. I remember the quiet ones. The ones that used to feel safe. Her head on my shoulder during a storm. Sunday mornings before the world woke up. The way she used to hum under her breath when she was cooking. Before the pride. Before the image. But even those memories don't hurt anymore. They just remind me I was capable of love. And now, I'm capable of it for myself. I pass by people sometimes who still look at me with that "I heard what happened" expression. Some offer nods. Some avoid eye contact. Some ask how I'm doing with that too careful tone, like they're unsure if I'm whole again. I always smile. Because I'm not whole again. I'm whole for the first time. You see, I spent years being the man behind the scenes. Quiet. Reliable. Steady. And for a while, I thought that was enough. That being the calm in someone else's storm meant you had value. But storms don't love calm. They consume it. And Ariel, God bless her, was a storm who never learned how to respect stillness. I used to think the worst thing someone could do was cheat on you, lie to you, betray you. But I've learned the worst thing someone can do is make you feel small. Bit by bit, word by word, laugh by laugh. Until one day, you stop recognizing your own strength. Not anymore. Now, I write my own story. No stage. No spotlight. No punchline. Just a man who stopped asking to be seen and finally decided to stand in the light he built himself. And you know what? It's enough.